Am I a bad person for deciding to cut ties with my stepmother after how she treated me and my wife after losing my baby? I have always had a difficult relationship with my father and his wife, my stepmother. If she decides you are her best friend, you can go from spending every weekend together to not speaking for months and becoming the subject of her harsh comments. She has a reputation for being cold, calculating, and sometimes outright vindictive. Other family members refuse to be in her company due to similar experiences. We've excused her behavior in the past, saying she is misunderstood, but from the outside, it's clear that this is just who she is. In May 2024, my wife and I lost our daughter. She was stillborn, and it has been the most unbearable moment of our lives. 2 days later, my father and stepmother came to visit us. They didn't bring flowers or a card. Apparently, they didn't have time, which I could forgive. But when I offered water and juice, she mocked me, asked if that was all we had, and requested a glass, ice, and something stronger, as if it were a party. I complied to keep the peace, but the resentment grew. She said all the wrong things to grieving parents, like, at least you can get pregnant, and it's something you'll have to move on from. My father, usually silent, looked visibly embarrassed. We had shown more grief over his dead dog than she did for our daughter. We had a phone call later, where she seemed to want to make amends, until she blamed my wife and me for the awkwardness and demanded that we take responsibility. For what, I have no idea. She ended by saying she would give us space, but would always be there for us. That was the last we heard from her. She never reached out for our daughter's funeral, my birthday, Father's Day, our daughter's due date, Christmas, or New Year's. She ignored the announcement of our second pregnancy and did not attend the charity walk we organized in memory of our daughter, where the rest of the family showed support. My wife has not contacted her because she is beyond hurt and is now managing a high-risk pregnancy. The final straw was when she posted on Facebook on New Year's saying that 2024 was the best year of her life, the same year she lost what was supposed to be her first grandchild. Now, with 8 weeks until our second daughter arrives, the thought of her pretending everything is fine, of her holding our baby, makes us sick. I don't want her in my life anymore. She has shown no respect for my wife or my daughter, and I refuse to let her taint what should be a joyful moment. Despite all this, I can't help but think about my father's position. For decades, he has tolerated her behavior, been complicit in her coldness, and remained silent as she pushed family members away. Sometimes, I wonder if, deep down, he feels trapped or if he truly supports her. Our relationship has suffered over time, and though we've never been close, part of me feels that if I cut ties with her, I will also be cutting off the only connection I have left with him. As the days pass and we prepare for our daughter's arrival, feelings of anxiety and anticipation constantly collide within me. The family is dividing into sides, some supporting us, others trying to downplay the situation, arguing that family is family, but at what cost? At the cost of allowing her toxicity to remain in our lives? I refuse to continue that cycle. A few days ago, my sister sent me a message. "Dad wants to talk to you," it said. About what? She didn't specify, but I can guess it's about this situation. I haven't responded yet. I don't know if I want to. But time keeps moving forward, and soon I will have to make a decision. I don't know if I'm ready to face everything that will come next. Several days had passed since I received that message from my sister, yet my phone remained unanswered. Every time I picked up the device, an invisible weight pressed down on my fingers, preventing me from typing. I knew that sooner or later I would have to face the conversation with my father, but the thought of hearing his voice, of possibly facing his denial or his attempt to justify my stepmother, was more than I could handle at that moment. Meanwhile, the days continued passing, and the arrival of our daughter became more imminent. My wife and I immersed ourselves in the final preparations, assembling the crib, choosing the outfit we would bring her home in. But even in those hopeful moments, the shadow of the situation with my family loomed over us. One afternoon, as I was organizing our baby's room, my wife sat on the bed and looked at me with an expression I knew well. "You need to talk to your father," she said softly. I didn't respond immediately. I turned away, pretending to focus on folding a tiny pink blanket, but I knew she was right. It wasn't just for me, it was for her, for our daughter. We needed clarity before she arrived. Finally, I gathered the courage and sent a short message to my sister, "Tell Dad I can talk tomorrow afternoon." Just a few minutes later, her response arrived, "He says he'll be waiting for your call." The next day, after hours of procrastination, I finally dialed his number. My father answered on the second ring. His voice sounded strangely calm, almost too composed, as if he were carefully choosing each word. "I'm glad you called, son," he said. "There's a lot we need to talk about." I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was coming. The conversation started with the usual formalities. How are we? How is the pregnancy going? Was everything okay with the house? But soon, the tension became unavoidable. "Your stepmother is hurt by all of this," he finally said. "She says she never meant to hurt you, that it's just the way she is." I let out a bitter laugh. "The way she is?" I repeated, feeling the anger bubbling in my throat. Not contacting us during our daughter's funeral, ignoring her existence, making cruel comments. "It's not just the way she is, Dad. It's unacceptable behavior." There was a long silence before my father sighed. "Look, I don't want to lose you or my granddaughter. I know everything that happened hasn't been easy, but it could be worse, don't you think? Family is family." I felt a knot in my stomach. The old excuse. Family is family. As if that justified everything. As if sharing blood meant we were obligated to accept abuse and indifference without question. "I can't allow her to keep hurting us, Dad," I said firmly. "My priority now is my wife and my daughter. I want to expose them to someone who doesn't respect our grief, who wasn't there in our darkest moments. If that means cutting ties, then so be it." My father didn't respond right away. "I understand," he finally said, but his voice sounded distant, though it hurts to hear it. "It hurts to live it, Dad," I replied, "but that's how it is." The call ended shortly after, without reaching any real resolution. I sat in silence, feeling a weight that I wasn't sure was relief or sadness. That night, as I lay beside my wife, I felt our baby move inside her belly. I placed my hand on her stomach and felt a tiny kick. A promise of life, of something new, of a different future. But I knew this story was far from over. Something told me my stepmother wouldn't stay silent for long. And my father, well, I wasn't sure what path he would take. But one thing was clear. I wouldn't let anyone take away the happiness that awaited us. The following weeks passed with a tense calm. Even though my conversation with my father had left a bitter taste deep inside, I felt it was just the beginning of something bigger. My stepmother wouldn't sit idly by. That wasn't her style. She was the type of person who needed to have the last word, the absolute control of the narrative, and it didn't take long for her to prove it. One day, as my wife and I were making the final preparations for our daughter's arrival, my sister sent me a message. "We need to talk." I knew it wasn't just a casual conversation. Something was brewing. I called immediately. "Dad and she are saying that you're the one who pushed them away, that you're exaggerating everything," my sister said, frustration in her voice. "She's telling her version of the story to everyone. She says you're being cruel, that you're punishing her for no reason." I felt my pulse quicken. It didn't surprise me in the slightest. This was what she always did, twisting the facts until she became the victim. "And Dad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He's letting it happen," my sister admitted. "Like always. He says he just wants peace." I stifled a bitter laugh. Peace. The same peace that had cost us our well-being for so many years. "I don't care what she says," I replied. "I'm not going to let her near my daughter. And if Dad doesn't understand that, then I'll have to distance myself from him too." My sister was silent for a moment. "I know. I just wanted you to know what's happening." I appreciated her honesty and hung up. My wife, who had been listening from the kitchen, approached and placed her hand on my arm. "Don't let it get to you," she said softly. "She has no power over us anymore." I clung to those words with all my strength. But as if the universe was determined to test me, a few days later, we received an unexpected notification. My stepmother had sent us an email. My wife and I read it together, our eyes scanning each word cautiously. Dear my name, I deeply regret everything that has happened between us. It pains me to know that you are so angry with me. I never intended to hurt you or your wife. I want to fix this before the baby arrives. I don't want her to grow up without knowing her grandmother. I looked up, and my wife was already staring at me in disbelief. Is she joking? I shook my head. I don't know what I expected, but definitely not this. It was the same pattern as always. Not true remorse, but manipulation disguised as an apology. An attempt to make us feel guilty, to make us doubt our decision. My wife intertwined her hand with mine. You don't have to respond. You don't have to give her more chances. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that I wouldn't. Not this time. However, the conflict didn't end there. As the due date approached, messages from family members became more persistent. Some said I should reconcile, that it was better to have the family together. Others supported us, reminding us that we had every right to set boundaries. Amid all that pressure, my father finally called me. Son, can we talk in person? Something in his voice made me pause. He didn't sound like before. There was a tone of urgency, maybe even fear. I hesitated, but finally agreed. Okay, tomorrow. I didn't know what to expect from that meeting, but something told me that whatever my father had to say could change everything. The day of my meeting with my father arrived quickly, though every hour felt eternal. As I drove to the cafe where we had agreed to meet, my mind played through different scenarios of what he might say. Despite the tension, I felt a coldness inside me. There was no sadness or fear, just an emptiness accompanied by firm determination. I was no longer the child seeking his father's approval, nor the young man trying to keep the peace at the cost of his own happiness. I was a man who would protect his family no matter what came next. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked thinner, his shoulders slightly hunched. His eyes lit up for a brief moment when he saw me, but then he looked down, as if calculating his words. Thank you for coming, he said as he sat down. We ordered coffee, and for a few minutes, we remained silent. It wasn't until the waiter walked away that he spoke again. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, he began. But I want you to know that I never wanted things to get to this point. I crossed my arms, waiting. I knew there was something more, something that had forced him to ask for this meeting. She, your stepmother, has been saying a lot of things about you, about your wife. I'm not here to defend her, but I want you to understand her perspective, he said in a tired voice. There's nothing to understand, I replied coldly. She never showed genuine interest in us. When we needed her, she ignored us. When she should have supported us, she treated us with contempt. Now that we've chosen to step away, suddenly she wants to make amends. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. I know, son, but what I need to tell you is that she's starting to take this in a different direction. I frowned. Different how? My father took a sip of his coffee, taking his time before responding. She's been talking about taking legal action to see your daughter. The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. I leaned forward. She can't do that. She has no right. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean she won't try, he said in a low voice. She's been speaking with lawyers, looking for a way to obtain visitation rights. She says it's not fair that you're keeping her from her granddaughter before she even gets a chance to meet her. I felt my blood boil. She's not her granddaughter. She never cared about her family. She can't suddenly pretend she does now just because she wants control. My father sighed. I know, but the law doesn't always work the way we want it to. If she takes this to court, it could cause you a lot of trouble. I ran a hand over my face, trying to process the information. Are you on her side in this? No, son, I'm not. But I do want to warn you. I don't want this to turn into something worse. I took a deep breath. Thank you for telling me. But if she thinks she can force her way into our lives, she's wrong. If she tries anything, we'll fight back. I won't let her near my daughter. My father nodded slowly. I understand. I just want you to carefully consider the steps you take. The rest of the conversation was calmer, but the tension never truly disappeared. When we finally said our goodbyes, I knew that something had changed between us. I wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. When I got home, I told my wife everything. Her eyes reflected the same determination I felt inside. "Let her try," she said coldly. "She has no idea who she's dealing with." The situation had escalated in a way I had never imagined. What had started as a decision to distance ourselves from a toxic person had now turned into a possible legal battle. But one thing was certain: we would not back down. The future was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Despite the looming threat of my stepmother, my wife and I focused on what truly mattered: the imminent arrival of our daughter. Every passing day brought us closer to her birth, and with it, my determination to protect my family grew even stronger. But the shadow of my stepmother wasn't long in manifesting. We received a letter from a lawyer representing her, claiming that she had a right to see her granddaughter and that she would pursue legal action if we prevented it. I read the letter in disbelief. She had never shown any interest in our family before, and now she suddenly wanted to play the role of a concerned grandmother. We wasted no time. We contacted a lawyer and explained the entire situation. After reviewing the case, he reassured us. In our jurisdiction, grandparents didn't have automatic rights to visit their grandchildren without a previously established relationship, and my stepmother had no solid legal argument. Still, he warned us that she could put us through a frustrating process if she chose to persist. And persist she did. She tried to manipulate the situation, sending messages to other family members, seeking support, painting herself as the victim. But this time, her strategy failed. Many already knew her true nature. The family didn't respond the way she expected, and little by little, her narrative lost strength. My father, though still trapped in his relationship with her, never tried to pressure me again. He knew our decision was unshakable. Finally, the situation reached its breaking point when our daughter was born. The overwhelming joy of holding her in my arms for the first time erased any lingering worries. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. She deserved to grow up in an environment filled with love, free from my stepmother's toxicity. As expected, my stepmother made one last desperate attempt to reach out. She sent us a message, pleading for the chance to see the baby, saying that we had no right to keep her away from her family. But there was nothing left to discuss. We didn't respond. There was no place for her in our lives. Time passed, and with each day, my stepmother's influence faded away. My wife and I focused on our new life as parents, surrounded by people who genuinely supported us. Her absence was a relief, a necessary closure to a painful chapter of my life. We may never know if my father will one day open his eyes and walk away from her, but I no longer wait for that answer. I've realized that family isn't just the one you share blood with. It's the one that chooses to love and respect you unconditionally. And so, with our daughter in our arms and a future full of possibilities, we left that story behind. There was no more space for the pain of the past. There was only the path forward.